Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, RegisKillbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and these are 5 cards we need in Kobolds and Catacombs. And what I mean by that is these are essentially 5 custom cards that I've created that are counter cards, tech cards, answer cards to certain cards and strategies we're currently seeing in the Hearthstone meta that I think are particularly oppressive or unfun to play against, or frankly, just annoying. So essentially, I made these cards to answer the things I like the least about Hearthstone right now. Now, of course, as is the case with any tech card, I didn't design these to be overpowered or completely shut those things down, just to give the meta ways to answer certain strategies and prevent certain things from becoming even more powerful and even more common and even more annoying than they are right now. So essentially, if Kobolds and Catacombs provides any sort of tech or answer cards that look like the ones you're about to see on this list, I will be a very, very happy Hearthstone player. So let's go ahead and jump into this list. Up first here, I have a card I'm calling Czar the Pained, which if you are paying attention at all, you'll see this is a pretty clear pun on the card Raza the Chained. This is a 7 mana 4/4 minion. That mana cost and stat allocation is not an accident, and has a very interesting battle cry. If you haven't used your hero power this game, you make all hero powers permanently cost 3 mana for the rest of the game. So essentially, this is the ultimate Raza the Chained counter. Now, I know that Raza the Chained is rotating out of standard format before too long, but he's always going to be in wild, and a card like this is important to exist in that format as well, not to mention that there are a lot of great hero powers and utilization of those hero powers outside of just Raza the Chained and Shadow Reaper Anduin, although quite clearly this is a tongue-in-cheek reference to the particular machine gun Highlander Priest style of play and is designed as a direct counter to that because it comes down on turn 7, whereas Shadow Reaper Anduin comes down on turn 8, and it's a 4-tech minion as well, which Priest can have some difficulty dealing with. But the reason I feel like Czar the Pained is okay, because that is a very, very powerful effect, right? To basically increase the cost of a hero power from 0 to 3, but also just normal hero powers from 2 to 3 permanently for the rest of the game. Some classes get a lot of value out of their hero power, think things like Warlock and Life Tapping. There are also all the other Death Knights that have very powerful hero powers. So just adding a single mana cost to those throughout the course of the game can be really detrimental to some people's strategies or game plans, particularly in control-style matchups. But Czar the Pained does it in a balanced way, right? He does it to you and your opponent. It's all hero powers, so that's fair right off the bat. And, of course, there's this pretty difficult condition to achieve as well with Czar if you actually want him to work. For instance, if you draw Czar in the late game, you just have to have used your hero power, probably. Or you know you're exactly countering a Shadow Reaper Anduin Priest, and you just can't use your hero power because you know Czar is coming, or you have some way to draw Czar faster. Many different things, but if you play him on turn 7, that might not be so bad. You can just play on curve, you can hold a hero power here or there without losing too much value in the long game. So there's a nice little balancing act there about how to utilize this card and how to be careful so that you don't just ruin yourself on the way to playing Czar. You still get by without using hero power. So I think there are enough essentially checks and balances in the design here that Czar feels like a good balanced counter tech card to certain things without feeling just super easy or super overpowered. And if anything, he might just be a little underpowered, but that's a really good check on Highlander Priest in both standard format for the next 3-4 months and also in wild format essentially forever. And I think that's a really important check to have. So up next, let's move on to Dirty Rat's cousin. This is the Muddy Rat. This is a 3 mana 1/2 minion, and it has a very similar battle cry to Dirty Rat, but in a different direction. With Muddy Rat here, you're actually going to be disrupting the spells in your opponent's hand, not just their minions. So this battle cry reads, your opponent casts a random spell from their hand, targeting this minion if applicable. So essentially, you just take any random spell they have and it just casts. If that's a Flame Strike, that means they cast a free Flame Strike on you, killing your Muddy Rat and anything else on your board in the process. That could backfire. If it's a Spike Ridge Steed, on the other hand, they cast a Spike Ridge Steed on your Muddy Rat, which is pretty insane. So this is really, really good against buff-style cards in particular. So that's the most obvious tech answers, those really powerful in-hand spell buffs, including things like Molten Reflection, for instance, in a Quest Mage. That's fantastic. But it's also just a disruptive card for any sort of spell or combo deck, and that's really the design here. So this has essentially 2 different operations. good against buff decks, any kind of paladin with Spike Ridge Steeds or Blessing of Kings, even sometimes against priests with things like Power Word Shield, right? But really, really good against combo decks too that need certain spells. Maybe they need that Simulacrum or that Molten Reflection to actually pull something off, and you cast Simulacrum when they don't want it to happen, so they copy a Doomsayer. You cast that Molten Reflection on your Muddy Rat, completely burning that option out of the game. So things like Quest Mage or any other future combo spell deck that feels particularly oppressive in the meta suddenly gets a lot worse. Now, most of the time, though, Muddy Rat is just going to be a miss that gives your opponent free value. Think of things like, Arcane Intellect, for instance. If you just cast your opponent's Arcane Intellect for free, most of the time that's going to be a powerful play for them. So this card has a lot of downside built in, perhaps even more so than Dirty Rat, and a clear bit of upside as well, right? But you don't want to be casting your opponent's ultimate infestations for free either, unless you're trying specifically to mill some cards or burn some cards. But most of the time, it's going to be the hard kind of card to include in just any given deck. It's going to be specific kind of card combo answering sort of card, not just an everyday general use card, probably even more so than Dirty Rat. Like, I think less decks and less metas would support Muddy Rat than they do Dirty Rat. But still an important card to exist, because just in case something ever did become too oppressive or too unfun like those Quest Mages, Muddy Rat could just give you yet another way to actually answer those and break up their combo and give yourself a chance to win a game that might otherwise seem unwinnable. And I think it's important that cards like that do exist. So up next, let's move on to my third card here. I'm calling this one the Gnomish Ambusher. This is a new 4-mana neutral minion. It's a 3/2 by default. It also has Taunt by default. And finally, it has a Battle Cry that is essentially a tech card against other Battle Cry cards. And this allows you to destroy a Battle Cry minion and gain +2/+2. So any Battle Cry minion that had a Battle Cry, whether it was activated or not, is up for grabs once it's on the board. So I think most obviously this is an answer sort of exactly to Bone Mare, right? Like, if your opponent Bone Mare is a 1/1, you play Gnomish Ambusher, you kill the actual Bone Mare 5/5, and you also play a 5/4 Taunt that theoretically trades into the 1/1 that was buffed on Bone Mare. Say that Swashbuckler or whatever it might be. Now, clearly this doesn't necessarily trade into every Bone Mare card, but you are getting already a 5/5 swing off Bone Mare specifically, and a 5/4 Taunt for 4, which is a fairly okay card on its own, right? It's got sort of that Yeti stat line, so it's not bad. The reason you can't make Gnomish Ambusher really above cost when it comes to stats, like you couldn't make this a 5/7 taunt, unlike Galactic Crawler or Hungry Crab, which get stats way above what they should get based on their mana cost, is because there are just too many Battle Cry minions that you can destroy. You can destroy things like Alexstrasza for 8/8s, or you can get even bigger minions in a lot of different ways. So, in other words, Galactic Crawler and Hungry Crab have very limited pools of the number of things they can kill. There's just not that many giant things they can kill all that often. Gnomish Ambusher could kill a lot of big stuff. So you need to limit the upside a little bit, and still it's a very powerful card nonetheless. I think this is the kind of card that would be run in a ton of decks. A lot of people would like to use this one, just an assassinate on a stick. Essentially here you're getting to destroy something. It's almost like a Vile Spine Slayer in a lot of ways. Now clearly it's a little bit more restricted in its use in Vile Spine Slayer because it's not any minion, it's only Battle Cry minions, so I think that does help dial back on it. But clearly I designed this to be a good card because right now we just don't have any answers to Battle Cries, essentially. There's nothing that directly answers that mechanic, and I thought it was important that we had something that could just help keep that in check in case cards like Bone Mare specifically ever run rampant like they are now. Even things like Firefly, though, is a little Battle Cry minion that you can just kill it kind of for free and get a nice little taunt body too. So Gnomish Ambusher has a wide range of effects, maybe really, really high swings, maybe small swings, and it's just a value 4-mana taunt. But a strong, intentionally strong card that's probably the best actual card in this entire list as far as like general use is concerned. But I think that's good. That's exactly what I wanted it to be, because Battle Cry is so far just a completely unanswered mechanic or keyword in Hearthstone. So up next, I have my fourth card on this list. I'm calling this one Dark Shire Exorcist. This would be a new 6-mana neutral minion, 5/4 in stats, with a battle cry that reads, silence a taunt minion and then change its attack to 1. And this might actually look like another Bone Mare counter. And in some ways it is just a direct, great Bone Mare answer because you can silence off the buff that the Bone Mare gave to the minion, and then also reduce that minion's attack to 1 in case it wasn't, say they buffed another Bone Mare or whatever. You could silence off the 9/9 and turn it into a 1/5 essentially using only Darkshire Exorcist. But that's not really the reason I designed this as a tech card. This is really more of a thought about things like Big Priest and Big Druid in particular, both of which tend to run some fairly large taunt minions that are very beneficial to silence. Think things like Obsidian Statue and Lich King in particular are both great cards to silence because they both have very, very powerful onboard effects, whether that's Death Rattle destroying a minion or, you know, just drawing a Death Knight card all the time. And then also, they both have fairly high attack values too, especially in the case of Lich King. Turning him into a 1-attack minion is a huge answer. And we've seen this sort of big archetype really, really becoming popular in the last month or so. Big Priest and Big Druid are some of the most common decks at the high end of the Legend ladder. And Darkshire Exorcist is just another card that's great at answering those kinds of minions. Now, this is not a card you'd probably want to run in every deck necessarily. You maybe could just because there's enough taunt stuff out there, and silencing taunts alone just to push through for damage is sometimes worth it. But, you know, clearly not a great stat allocation for its cost. Pretty weak body. Other times, the Battlecry just won't do anything if your opponent, you know, if they're running a tiny token list. Like if you're going to silence a taunt totem from Shaman, that'd be terrible. You turn their 0/2 taunt into a 1/2 minion. That'd be awful. So some decks, this would fall flat again, so it's a risky card to run on the ladder. It's unlike something like, say, Skulking Geist, for instance, where it almost always hits something, and even when it doesn't, you know, a 4/6 is the kind of body that still trades fairly well, where on the other hand, Darkshire Exorcist here would just die to a lot of things at 4 health. That's a much riskier sort of tech card to run, but still an important one to exist, an answer to Big and answer to Bone Mare, both of which are plaguing Hearthstone's meta right now in some ways, some would argue. So I think a cool card that would really help handle and keep those two specific problems in check. And then finally here we have Mora, another legendary minion. This one essentially follows a giant kind of pattern where we have a cost reduction over time, because as you can see, Mora is a 14 mana minion, unplayable most of the time. He's 12/12 in stats though, and his primary function here is that he can't be frozen. We have the freeze effects, I think, are one of the most consistently annoying and frustrating things in Hearthstone. You just can't do much about freeze. You can silence your minions, of course, but that often feels pretty bad. And you can only, you know, usually silence one thing at a time, and often you're silencing off other stats or other effects, and you need the room on the board to silence. There's just a lot that goes into silencing. It doesn't work very well as a counter against freeze, outside of something like the old card Wailing Soul, which silenced your entire board. There's just not a lot of good ways to just ignore freeze effects, and then they just keep coming, right? It's Blizzard, Frost Nova, Blizzard, Frost Nova. So I designed Mora essentially as a counter card to freeze effects. Right now, we really only see freeze and mage, but freeze shaman is an idea Blizzard's clearly going to probably work on some more. So if multiple classes start utilizing freeze effects more commonly, a card like Mora would be really important as an answer to that. And also, Mora essentially punishes card draw too, and often decks that are freezing are drawing a lot of cards. That's always been Freeze Mage's primary goal, right? Is stall out the board, draw into either my combo for Quest Mage or just my damage for old school Freeze Mage. And Mora answers both of those things perfectly because you're punishing super heavy card draw, which means he gets by turn 10, for instance, often Mora would be completely free, but even earlier he's usually going to be playable, right? By turn 6 or something, if you're playing a deck with a lot of card draw, you would expect Mora to be a 5/6 mana 12/12 that can't be frozen, and that could be a nightmare for certain classes to deal with. Certainly they can still polymorph him and meteor him, and there's other ways to answer it right, but specifically they have to utilize those resources. So Mora is pretty cool in that regard. And by the way, a lot of people say, why not just make him can't be targeted? Wouldn't that do the same thing? No, a lot of the freeze effects, in fact, don't care about can't be targeted. We already have cards that can't be targeted. I want one that specifically can't be frozen. So not only is he good against the freezing classes or the freezing style of play, but also he's just good against combo decks in general because they're often drawing a ton of cards. Think Highlander Priest and how many cards they draw. Essentially, they're going to have a 0 mana Mora staring them in the face sooner rather than later, and that's just a really powerful onboard swing. If you could put 12/12 in stats out, and clearly Priest can deal with it with Shadow Word Death and everything else, but that's just removing other resources, enabling your other minions to do more. So kind of a double tech card in a lot of ways here for Mora. Most specifically great against things like Freeze Mage, or Stall Mage, but really good just against any combo deck or deck that's intending to draw a lot. And the kind of legendary you could squeeze into a lot of different lists, both aggressive and probably even control decks as well. So I know a lot of people are thinking, well, eventually Rockmora is always going to be 0 mana. Isn't that a problem? Like if a game goes to 14 turns, then Rockmora is just completely going to be free all the time. And I don't actually think that's a problem. If you're getting into a 14 turn game, most of the time the game is going to either be won or lost already, or if it's still in contention, that people will have the kind of answers, and there'll be the kinds of decks that have the sort of answers for Rockmora. They'll have the Twisting Nethers, the Brawls, the Shadow Word Deaths, the Executes, whatever it might be. So I don't think this is too swingy of a card if one person draws it and the other doesn't. And I don't think it's the kind of card everybody runs necessarily either. So I don't think that's a problem. I think it's really more about the punishing the exact kinds of games where they usually only go to turn 6 or 8 or 11. And it's not a guarantee that Rockmora is there, but it's really more punishing people who are following a specific kind of strategy. So I don't really think that the inevitability of Rockmora is an issue at all. And in fact, I would just absolutely love to see this card in Hearthstone. So there you go, folks. That's my list. Those are 5 cards I think we need in Kobolds and Catacombs. Of course, the exact names and even the effects and the stats will never actually be seen. These are just custom cards. These are my specific dreams. But if Blizzard addresses some of the same kinds of things that I addressed in this list, I would still be a pretty happy Hearthstone player. Of course, I'm a happy Hearthstone player anyway, as anybody who watches me often knows. I love the game. But of course, you know, certain archetypes, certain strategies, certain cards can be annoying. And just knowing that you have an outlet, knowing that you have some way to keep that card in check can be a nice relief. It can be a nice reassurance in the Hearthstone meta. So that's exactly why these cards would be perfect for me, and I think do exactly that. So if you guys have any thoughts, comments, questions on these cards, of course, leave those in the comments below. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.